Good morning, dangerous men. They asked me to speak and they told me it was going to be Saturday morning, and I figured, what better time to talk about work, right? When we're also would rather be sleeping in this morning. But not just any work. We're going to talk about dangerous work this morning. And while I'd love to tell you a bunch of stories of cool dudes doing dangerous stuff, that's not really the kind of dangerous work I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is real dirty fingernails, move the kingdom of God forward, push back the kingdom of darkness work that we do in our daily lives. Now, what I'm not talking about this morning is ministry, right? But I'm getting ahead of myself. So before that, I have a question for you, and that is, why do you work? Why do you work? Because the thing of it is, if you work because you're out there trying to make some money to buy yourself a Lexus, or maybe even provide for your family, or write a big fat tithe check, or support missions, then you've absolutely missed the meaning of work. And there's a problem with that, and I understand if you do, right? Because it's what we've been taught all our lives, but it's dead wrong. And it's costing us dearly. According to the American Psychological Association, chronic stress is linked to the 6 leading causes of death in men, all 6. There's heart disease, cancer, lung ailments, accidents, cirrhosis of the liver, and suicide. And more than 75% of all doctors' visits stem from stress-related ailments and complaints. My big idea today is that the vast majority of all this stress, it comes down to one thing, and that's a faulty view of work, particularly for us as Christian men. And so what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the parable of the prodigal son. How many know the parable of the prodigal son, right? But we're not actually going to spend a whole lot of time on the prodigal son. You see, he's the one who gets all the attention, right? We've named it after him. But I actually want to talk about the older brother this morning. Now, I'm going to catch you up on the story. Basically, here's what happens. There's dad, he's got 2 sons. And first son, let's call him Jake, right? He's the younger brother. And he basically, he just kind of wants to do things his own way. And he says, hey, Dad, I wish you were dead. I'd rather have my inheritance now. Thanks. And then what's he do? He takes that and he goes and he blows it on, parties and poor choices. And finds himself one day, wishing that he could eat the pig's food. And realizes, hey, I'd rather go back and work, for my dad. The servants are doing better than this. And so that's what he does. And his dad, his dad sees him coming from a long way off. And we all know the story. He goes running to him, brings him in. There's this big party and it's awesome. But what I'd like to do is pick up the story here where the older brother comes back into the picture. Where was he? Do you guys remember? The older brother was out in the field. And so this older brother, let's call him Ernie, right? His real name is Ernest, because that's a good big brother name, but we'll call him Ernie this morning. And Ernie's out in the field, he's working, and he's getting close to the house, and he hears there's a party going on, like there's something happening. He's like, oh shoot, Fred's not getting married until next week, right? It's not Jimmy's birthday. What in the world is going on? And I pity the poor soul, the servant who happened to be closer, to Ernie at the time. And so Ernie, he's like, what is going on? And the guy's like, I can't tell him. He's like, well, your brother's home, and your dad's throwing a party. He's throwing a party? Like what? He thought his brother was going to come home. He's going to get a learning, What? This is what work means. And instead his dad throws a party. And so somehow the servant gets away. He gets away and he goes and he tells his dad, he said the dad, and we'll call the dad Bob, right? This is my paraphrased version, by the way. He says, Bob, you've got Ernie's out in the field. He's flipping wheelbarrows. Like, it's not pretty. You got to get out there and talk to him. And so Bob does. He goes out and like any good father, he goes to Ernie and he says, hey, what's going on, son? And Ernie's like, hey, stop calling me Ernie, right? I've been telling you, my name is Ernest. And for how long? It's 15 years, because that's how long Jake's been gone blowing all your money. And so he's fit to be tied, right? He's mad. And Bob comes to him and he says, what's wrong? He's like, I've been working for years. I've been in these fields. I've done everything that you asked. and you won't even give me the mountain bike I asked for last Christmas. You won't give me anything. And Bob goes to him and he puts his hand on his shoulder and he says, son, everything I have is yours. I'm always with you. You see, what we do, we tend to be like that older brother, the older son. He thought what work was about. He thought it was about doing what he was supposed to do. He thought it was about being diligent. He thought it was about, getting the harvest, working in the field, doing what his dad asked him to do. But all along, he had missed the whole point. Because that idea of work, and if that's your idea of work, then you've missed it, because that's not work, that's domestication, right? Let's take a look at what the definition of domestication is. Now, you weren't designed, before we get there, you weren't designed to be domesticated. This is never the original intent of God. If you think God wants you to work hard, right? If you think God wants you to do what you're told, to be out in the field, and that's your identity, then you've missed it. And you've picked up this idea of domestication. And it looks like this. You guys got a sneak peek here. This is what it looks like to be domesticated. And domestication is the process of taming an animal and keeping it as a pet or on a farm. It's not exactly the loftiest of ambitions, is it? Right? But that's what we've given ourselves to largely as men. You see, we weren't called, especially we go back to Genesis 1, which we'll do in just a moment here. You'll see we weren't called to be domesticated. We were destined to be dangerous. And whether you're, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, president of the United States, or you clean chicken coops for a living, I don't care. You were destined to be dangerous. And what it looks like, what does being dangerous look like? Well, just for kicks, let's take and look at the opposite of domestication, right? Here's a few words that we can use to describe that. Wild, roaming, savage, unclaimed, untamed, ferocious, fierce, vicious, unbroken, natural, uncontrollable, and uncivilized. That's more like it. And we get this as boys, right? So those of you who know my son Liam, he's 8 years old now, and he walked in to the house one morning. He wakes up ridiculously early, but he walks in one morning, undoubtedly only in his underwear and tracking muddy, footprints all through the house with his bare feet. He looks up at my wife Hilda Marie and he says, "I was born to be in the wild." And if any of you know my son Liam, you know that's 100% true. We didn't realize it at the time, but the name Liam means hard-headed warrior. Enough said. Now, we all have that Liam inside of us. We all feel that call and that draw to be dangerous, that destiny to be dangerous. But like every once wild Mustang, we've let ourselves be whipped into shape and tamed by the forces of culture and our own wrong view of work. So the next question that I want to bring up here is, which is nobler, work or ministry? Now, I want to share a little bit of my story and how I got to speaking about this today. So I got saved in middle school, and through middle school and high school, I was just on fire for the Lord. Just absolutely wanted to give my entire life for him. He had all of me. And as it came time to think about college and work and what I was going to do, it was absolutely clear. If you're a Christian, you become a pastor. That's what you do. And that presented a problem for me because I loved the Lord, but I am not carved out to be a pastor. Those two don't add up. I played guitar at the time, so I was like, maybe I can be, a worship leader, but I just don't have the chops to be a worship leader like these guys up here. And you don't want me within 100 feet of kids ministry because people start crying, both the kids and the leaders. Like, it's not a good thing. So I'm stuck. I'm wrestling with it. It's like, Lord, I just want to do what you want me to do, but I don't know what that is. And so, I ended up going to a school of ministry. and while I was there, this is how bad it got, right? This is 100% true. I was sitting there one morning by myself and just thinking of like, what am I going to do after ministry school? It's only a 2-year program. And I literally thought to myself, is there a way to make money as an Old Testament prophet? Like, that would be pretty cool, you know? How can I? Needless to say, the answer, I never got the answer, right? Let's not go there. And so I get married, and my wife, Hilda Marie, and I, we moved down to Atlanta, Georgia. And we actually came here to be part of another ministry. I worked part-time for the ministry, which ended up being 40 plus hours. And I worked part-time for work, which ended up being 40 plus hours to make ends meet. And let me tell you, I absolutely fell in love with work. I just loved what I did. And I was bottom of the totem pole, but there's something in me came alive when I went to work. And I was doing both. I was burning the candle at both ends, working an exceptional amount of time between ministry and work. And over the summer of 2008, I realized I can't keep running this way. You know, I'm not giving my all in either of these spaces. I really need to commit to one as my first and foremost. And I struggled with that because my heart longed to work. You know, it felt right. But everything that I'd ever been taught about what it means to be a good, solid Christian meant that I needed to go be in ministry. And I wrestled with it. And one morning, a friend of mine and I got together, and he said, hey, I had a dream about you. And I was like, oh, really? And he said, yeah. He said, you were standing at a crossroads, and you were just distraught. You couldn't, which way do I go? And you felt like one way was imminent death, and the other way was everything that you could ever want. And the Lord came in, and he said to you, he said, pick a route. Whichever way you go, I'm going to bless you. And I think that's the invitation that we each have each and every day. It's not so much a question of work or ministry. It's a question of whether or not we're going with God. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But what happened in my story is within 1 month, I went from the bottom of the totem pole, literally answering, support emails for the company, to being an owner. And had the wonderful start to an incredible journey where I ended up leading a multi-million-dollar business. And much of it stemmed from that one decision that I made. The Lord really did bless it. Now that's my story, but what I want to do is take a look at what Scripture has to say about it, right? And when you look at it, I want to bring to light the fact that work both precedes, comes before ministry in Scripture, and work both succeeds, comes after ministry in Scripture. Let's take a look. If you want to find out what was the original plan, then what do? You go to Genesis 1, right? That's where it all starts. Now, again, just to paint a little bit of a picture for what's going on here, God has just knocked out like the ultimate work week, right? How many of you have a to-do list that starts like this on Sunday night? Monday, let's create time. Like literally, let's make some time. Tuesday, how about the sky? That would be novel. Wednesday, we'll take a breather. We'll doodle around a little bit, maybe create a few continents here and there, and every single plant that you could ever imagine. And then Thursday, just toss a few stars in the sky, maybe a couple billion. Throw some rocks around them. We'll call them planets, and we'll call it a day. And then finally, things might be a little boring at this point. There's not much going on, so we'll create every single living thing. And that's Friday. One could be forgiven for wanting to kick it back a little bit on Saturday at this point. He's done a lot of work. And we can tell that God is actually a little spent at this point because he creates Adam and Eve. And what does he tell them? He says, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. And then God blessed them. And God said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on earth. He said, I bless you with work. How many of you want to bless people with your work, right? I bless you to do my laundry. I bless you to check my email inbox. And I bless you to pay all of my bills. Thank you very much. God blesses us with work because work is a blessing, and that's great news. Because that means when you work, God will bless it. No matter where you are on the totem pole, your work matters. An example of this is Jesus himself, right? Jesus came And for the first, he had his adolescence, and then for the bulk of his adult life, what was he doing? Was he in ministry? No, he was working as a carpenter. Now, he could have in his early 20s decided, I'm going to go straight into ministry. He could have done everything he needed to do, and he could have been off to heaven 10 years earlier, right? But instead, in the grand scheme, the perfect design of God, he spent at least 10 years working as an adult. And the question is why, right? And it's because work is glorious. If you're struggling with your work, then you've missed out on the fact that work is a blessing. Now, a couple of scriptures. I'm not just making this stuff up, guys. So we're going to burn through these real quick, and there's a whole lot more. But take a look here. Proverbs 11:8. Bad work gets paid with a bad check, but good work gets solid pay. Proverbs 12:14. Well-spoken words bring satisfaction. Well-done work has its own reward. The diligent find freedom in their work, while the lazy are oppressed by work. The diligent gets a warm commendation, but shiftless work earns an angry rebuke. Proverbs 22:29. Observe people who are good at their work. Skilled workers won't take a backseat to anyone. Proverbs 25:2. God delights in concealing things, but scientists or kings delight in discovering them. 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27, Ephesians 6 through 8, Colossians 3:23 through 25. It's over and over and over again. Work is a blessing. So work was part of the original plan. We've got that from Genesis 1. Now let's talk about the fact that work is part of the eternal plan. So where do we go to look at what's going to happen at the end? Well, we go to the end, right? Now, if you think that, the point of work is to retire and spend the rest of your days on the back nine of Augusta National, you've got another thing coming for you. If you think that in the new heaven and new earth, we're going to be floating around as naked babies with a, thing on here, floating on clouds and shooting bows, you've got another thing coming. So let's take a little look at what is actually going to happen, right? The end of all things, the end of all time, what's going to take place? This is important, I promise. All right, so we're looking at Revelation 22, it's the last book of the Bible, verses 1 through 3. And a little bit of context here, we're after all the crazy horses and bulls and trumpets and just insanity that's happened at the end of the age, if you will. We've had the war to end all wars twice, and here we are with a new heaven and a new earth, and they're perfect. Now, if none of that makes sense to you, don't worry. I just need to paint a picture that we aren't these half-naked babies, right? There's this real world that we're going to be part of. And so as we read this verse, I want you to look at how descriptive and how tactile it is. So he showed me a pure river, water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and the Lamb. In the middle of its street on either side of the river was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each yielding its fruit in every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations, and there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. We'll be doing work in the New Jerusalem. Now, if you're wondering, hey, where is he coming up with all this work stuff, right? How do you get all of that from Revelation 22? Well, it's not just from Revelation 22. We actually have another picture from the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 65, where he talks about the New Jerusalem as well. And I want to read that to you here real quick. So just looking at the highlighted points, what's it say? It says, they shall plant vineyards, right? They shall build houses. Does that sound like work? Right? Planting and building. They shall not plant for another, or as the days of a tree. So shall be the days of my people, and the elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. What that means is for all eternity, we're not going to labor in vain, but we're going to enjoy the work of our hands. The goal here is to not work ourselves out of work. The goal here is something bigger. And there's a quote that I want to read to you guys from Thomas Nelson in his book, In Work Matters. And here's what he says. He says, if our daily work done for the glory of God and the common good of others in some way carries over to this new heavens and new earth, then our present work itself is overflowing with immeasurable and eternal significance. Immeasurable and eternal significance. How many times have you heard someone say, hey, do work that matters for eternity, and that's code for don't do your job, do ministry. But here what we've seen again and again through the scriptures is that our work today, the real dirty fingernails, nuts and bolts, whatever it is you do today, in some way, shape, or form can carry over, and in doing so has eternal and immeasurable significance. So I want to bring us back to this question, why do you work, right? And recapping just a moment, we aren't designed for domestication, right? We're called to do dangerous work that matters. And that work is, and we learned that work is a blessing, commissioned in Genesis 1, that will continue through Revelation 22. So what does it mean to work? Well, we work because we bear the image of God. Did you notice that? Back in Genesis 1, let's take a quick look at that again. Verse 26, he says, we were made in his image, according to our likeness. And then what's he do? He tells us the things that we're to do to work, to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it, to have dominion. You see, the original plan and the eternal purpose of work is for man, for you and me, to be with God and be like him. And there's a really important point that I want to make here, and that is, when you do your work, you are meant to work with God and not for God. We're called to work with God and not for God. All of that work, filling the earth and subduing it, was all meant to be done in the context of walking with the Lord in the garden. Do you guys see that? We're called to work with God and not for God. Now, look what happens here when we decide to take matters into our own hands. We're going to go to Genesis 3. We made it 2 chapters, guys, like 2 chapters, and then we screwed it up. All right, so Genesis 3, God says to Adam, "Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it. All the days of your life, both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth, and you shall eat the herb of the field and the sweat of your face. You shall eat bread until you return to the ground." Adam took matters into his own hands. He used his capacity for work for his own gain. He used it against God. And he wasn't the only one that did it. If we go just a few more chapters to Genesis 11, we see the same thing. If you guys remember the story of the Tower of Babel, a bunch of men come together and they say, hey, we got an idea. Like, we don't want to be scattered all over the place. We're going to build up a city. We're going to build a tower that reach the heavens so that we can be in control. And what happens, God comes down and he confuses their language and spreads them in every different direction. And what we can pull away from this is that our job is to work with him, not against him, right? We get that, but it's also not for him. Do you remember the older brother? He was working for his father and not with him. And so what I want to bring us to is this next point here, which is that work is your best opportunity to be with him, right? It's your best it's not second class. It's not something that you do after your quiet time every morning. Work is meant to be done with God. He's meant to fill every moment of what you do. I had an amazing example of this from my dad. We when I was in first, second, and third grade, we actually ran our own farm. And my dad at the time was working a full-time job as well. And so we did a lot of work together. And being, 7, 8, 9, however old that is, I remember one time I was too small to sit on our riding mower and mow the grass because it had a weight sensor in it and I was about 20 pounds shy of it. And so my dad actually took a piece of duct tape and taped the seat down so that I could do it. And so I'm riding on this mower that's like 18 times the size of me, right? And I'm cutting it, and not a concern in the world because I was with my dad. I knew that there was nothing that could happen to me because I was with my dad. But then something happened, and it happens to a lot of us, and we learn some negative things about work when this happens. But there was a moment where he couldn't be with me, and I had to work on my own. Now, many of you know my story. I've shared it from this stage, and there's a lot of pain in my story. But can I tell you that some of the deepest, darkest hurts that I've had were from times when I went to work on my own. And I was out of my depth. I didn't know what to do. And I learned in those moments that it's up to you. It's up to you to provide. It's up to you to get it done. If it doesn't happen, and if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, things are going to break and fail. And I've spent a long time working through that. You know, there were times when my dad and I would work, we would work 10-hour days. Again, I'm 7, 8 years old. We'd work 10-hour days digging a foundation for a house. And I look back on those memories and it's like, why did he ask a 7-year-old to do that? But when I remember those times, they were wonderful. I was with my dad, right? We were working hard. I mean, we were working very hard. And I owe so much of the work ethic that I have today, the strength that I have today, the capacity that I have to do so many of the things that I can do to those times that I got to work with my dad. But I also remember the times when I worked hours by myself. And can I tell you how much brokenness that put in my life? And as men, even as adults, we're doing that every single day. When you go to work without your father, you're introducing brokenness. You're introducing the sweat of your brow. You're introducing the pain that was never meant to be there from the very beginning. Because you and I, we were made to work with our Father and not for him. So when you invite God into whatever you do, when you commit to doing it with him in his presence and not for him, hoping for his favor, you become dangerous. And this dangerous work, you'll experience a richness of meaning that you simply cannot find anywhere else. And it's in this dangerous work that you'll experience what it's like to be in his image, to be like him. Now, what does a dangerous day of look like? You know, like a typical older brother, you know, even just this past year, something I was working on, I was wrestling with God over who was the provider. Is it me or is it him? Anyone been there? And I thought I was the provider. I thought it was up to me. And then maybe from time to time, God would throw a bone my way and we'd make do. And as I was wrestling with God, it became very clear that I was not a very good provider, right? And I needed his provision in my life. And so I remember sitting with him one morning and saying, hey, what does it look like for you to be my provider? And he showed me what a dangerous day of work looks like. But I have to stop for a moment. And I have to be honest with you, I wanted to create this like really cool acronym for you guys, and I just could not make it work. And so this is the best that I could do right here. Say it with me, PA-T, right? Now this could be party, right? Or it could be something else. I'll let you guys decide. But either way, you're gonna remember it now. I can guarantee that. So let's take a look at what PA-T stands for. So first off, this is the beginning of the day. What I want you to do is to pursue his peace. If you start every day with the Lord in your own peace in the garden, I promise you it's going to shed an entirely new light on what the Lord is doing. One of the things that I like that Graham Cook said is to win the battle against the kingdom of darkness is to be fresh every single day. And when you wake up and the very first thing you do is pursue peace, you will win the fight of freshness each and every day. No matter how tired you are, no matter how much you need to get done that day, the very first thing that you need to do is to pursue peace. When he was teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, what did he say? He said, blessed are the peacemakers. Not the peacekeepers, not even the peace finders, but the peacemakers. For they shall be called what? The sons of God. Right? So start the day by pursuing his peace. Once you've found his peace, what I want you to do is to allow yourself eager anticipation. Imagine if you started each and every day with the expectancy that what you were going to do would work, right? That instead of the sweat of your brow and the toil of your hands, that you would enjoy the fruit of your labor. What if you expected every single sales call to close? What if you expected every meeting to go well? How would that change the way you show up for those meetings? How would that change the weight of the day? So you pursue his peace, you allow yourself eager anticipation, and then you work like you're going to win. How many of you guys watch the Olympics? Any of you watch the Olympics? We watched a bunch of Olympics, me and my boys. And one of the things that the Lord kept just showing to me was the body language of the losing team. You could tell who was going to lose 30 minutes before the end of the match, right? You could tell because there would just be this kind of sunkenness. There would be a desperation about what they were doing. They were working not to lose, right? And invariably, when we work not to lose, we lose. But when we work to win, even when the other team gets the point, we're still high-fiving and going for it, right? And this isn't about burying our head in the sand, but it's about recognizing that he pulls all things together, right? For the good of those who seek him. What do we sing about this morning? And so if you approach each and every day as if you are working like you're going to win, it's going to dramatically change how you see the Lord in the work that you do each and every day. And finally, top it off with thankfulness. And this is not a step that you want to skip. If you were to work the day, right, Ty has said recently many times, the righteous exhaustion of a day, right? When you do a full day with God, you end that day righteously exhausted. But the very last thing that you do before you lay your head on the pillow and close your eyes is to top it off with thankfulness. Just thank the Lord for all that he's done. And when your heart approaches thankfulness, it's very difficult to be jealous. It's very difficult to be envious. It's very difficult to be desperate, right? Proverbs says that the God loyal are always giving what they do have, but the unrighteous are always wanting what they don't have. And when we end our day with thankfulness, we celebrate that we do have. And in him, we have everything that we could possibly need. Now, together, these really do make the recipe for a dangerous day of work. And if you find yourself worn out, if you find yourself weary, if you find yourself that you've gotten bored or even numb with your work, then consider this to be your Saturday morning wake-up call to go do dangerous work with God. Thanks, guys. Yeah.